I hope you enjoy my stories. Instead of just clicking thumbs down, please comment and share how we can do better. If you do like our video, then please like and subscribe. I suppose the best place to start this saga is the day I received the notification about that year's chili cook-off. The anticipation was bubbling in my veins, much like the hearty chilies that populate our annual event. You'd think that grown adults with kids, jobs, and mortgages to worry about wouldn't get so worked up over a pot of chili, but this event is a staple of our otherwise humdrum suburban life. Let me give you a bit of background about our neighborhood. We live in an upper-middle-class suburb, the epitome of tranquility. Think manicured lawns, squeaky clean tennis courts, and a community pool where the local teens, whose sole job is to check memberships, flip-flop around with an air of practiced boredom. Crime? Ha! The most criminal behavior we encounter is the sporadic speeder or the occasional recycling day mix-up. Everyone knows everyone, and we all play our parts in this idyllic, albeit scripted, suburban tableau. Now back to the infamous chili cook-off. Typically, this event is hosted at our tennis court. For a reason that continues to baffle me, our HOA has decided to appoint an armed security guard to this event. And not just any security personnel, mind you, but one equipped as if he's securing a high-stakes political summit instead of a neighborhood food fest. No other event, be it the neighborhood Easter egg hunt, the summer barbecue, or the Christmas caroling, requires any kind of professional oversight. But the chili cook-off? That's another story. Last year, our guard for hire was something out of a comic book, but not in a charming, Peter Parker-type way. No. This guy strutted in wearing a bulletproof vest emblazoned with a Punisher patch, parking his equally aggrandized SUV, also adorned with a sizable Punisher badge, directly on our pristine green lawn. Anyone who dared walk into the court was greeted by his stern countenance and his AR-15 slung nonchalantly over his shoulder. My God! For a chili cook-off! The absurdity was almost too much to bear. Here we were, families with our kids in tow, navigating around a guy who seemed to believe he was 3 seconds away from a full-scale assault. The man even roamed the gathering with his gun in one hand and a steaming bowl of chili in the other. The cognitive disconnect was glaring. Eventually, I and a few neighbors who shared my sentiment could no longer resist and decided to heckle him. With a grin plastered on my face, I called out, "What's the matter? Rent a cop," expecting an invasion from the chili bandits. The seriousness of his response was baffling. "You never know," he said, eyes narrowing. "You always gotta be prepared." Prepared for what? A showdown at high noon with an army of disgruntled chefs? We couldn't help but laugh, albeit uncomfortably. The fact that our HOA dollars were being spent on this performative security was maddening. I mean, I can think of a dozen other things that could use $65 an hour more effectively. As the day wore on, the absurdity transformed into a toxic cocktail of frustration and resentment, seasoned with the occasional jalapeno from my chili. The whole situation underscored just how disconnected our HOA was from the actual pulse of our community. What were they thinking? Did they really believe that this over-the-top show of force was necessary? Weeks turned into months, and the memory of the laughable security detail faded, but not the underlying agitation. The annual HOA meeting loomed on the horizon, and I was determined to bring this issue to light. As the meeting began, the foyer of our community clubhouse was filled with the predictable pleasantries and obligatory small talk. But beneath the thin veneer of suburban serenity, there was a burgeoning tide of dissatisfaction. The usual discussions of landscaping and clubhouse upkeep were addressed, and finally, the floor was opened for additional concerns. My hand shot up almost involuntarily. "Yes, Tom," the HOA president acknowledged, offering a perfunctory smile. About the security at the chili cook-off, I began, placing a noticeable emphasis on the word, security. Can someone explain why in God's name do we need an armed guard at a neighborhood event? The room buzzed with a mix of murmurs and nods of agreement. It's not just excessive, it's downright ridiculous. Predictably, the defensive retort from the head of the security committee followed. We take community safety very seriously. The world is an unpredictable place, and it's always better to be prepared than to be sorry. For what? I spat back, exasperated. We live in a neighborhood where the most exciting event of the month is the PTA bake sale. We don't need an action hero glaring at us like we're criminals at a family event. The tension in the room was palpable, and just when it seemed like we were reaching an impasse, old Mrs. Havers, a sweet lady who's lived in the neighborhood for 30 years, stood up. "Tom's right," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I felt so uneasy with that man around, couldn't enjoy myself at all. What happened to the days when we could just have fun? Her words catalyzed more residents to speak out. One by one, voices echoed the sentiment I had brought to the fore. Our collective frustration was clear, enough with the unnecessary theatrics. The head of the security committee paled under the onslaught of dissent. At that moment, something snapped in me. I couldn't stand there, watching these figureheads squander our hard-earned money on paranoia. Off the cuff, and fed up with the pretentious air of it all, I made an impromptu decision. I move that we remove the security detail from the chili cook-off. If anyone feels we need safety measures, let's consider something more reasonable and less insane. We put the motion to a vote right then and there. Overwhelmingly, the members voted against the return of our comic book mercenary. With a resounding clack of the gavel, it was decided, no more armed security. The triumphant sense of reclaiming common sense was short-lived, unfortunately for the guy who considered himself our neighborhood's personal punisher. The security company owner felt utterly humiliated. Word got around, thanks to him rampaging on social media, about how our soft neighborhood didn't appreciate his dedicated service. What a joke. In the weeks that followed, his business suffered. Suburban neighborhoods started to view him with suspicion. He eventually packed up, taking his misdirected bravado and his over-the-top gear somewhere else. A welcome departure in our eyes. But not before one final, dramatic display, a farewell social media post. He rambled on about how he was the last bastion against chaos in God-forsaken, complacent suburbia. It was laughable, pathetic even, and his desperate plea for respect garnered nothing more than eye rolls and pity likes. This year, I felt particularly good about our annual chili cook-off. The sun shined brightly, and the tennis courts were packed with families digging into bowls of delectable chili, laughter reverberating off the court walls. As I spooned a mouthful of my spicy entry, I couldn't help but chuckle about the ridiculousness of the previous year. Sure, maybe we speed a bit on occasion, and maybe our lawns aren't always perfectly manicured, but we certainly knew one thing. We didn't need an overly enthusiastic Punisher to protect our peace. The Punisher might have thought he was safeguarding our neighborhood, but the reality? We were rescuing our community from a self-declared hero looking for a non-existent villain. And life. It carried on, deliciously unreinforced. I honestly cannot believe what happened this week. It's like something out of a bizarre reality TV show. So, I've been living in this quiet gated community for a few years now, peacefully enjoying my internet connection without any interruptions. Suddenly, out of nowhere, my whole routine was thrown into chaos. Our internet wire, yes, the one that runs from the outside to the box, which is quite a distance away, was cut. I initially had no idea who was behind this, let alone the motive, but eventually, the pieces started to fall into place. Apparently, someone thought the tiny bit of wire that was exposed to the box was an eyesore. Here's the thing. It's been there for years, and there are plenty of other wires in the same spot that no one said anything about. What gives? So, we did what anyone in our situation would do. We called Spectrum, our internet service provider, and they sent a technician out to check it out. Now, here's where things got really interesting. The Spectrum guy took one look at the situation and was just as baffled as we were. "What the F?" he said. "They can't do that. They can't destroy our property." He explained that not only had someone cut the expensive, long wire, but they also took it. Just straight up stole it. Apparently, according to him, if the wire hadn't been stolen, he might have been able to reconnect it even with the cut, but now it was a bigger problem. And here's a real kicker. It's not even our wire. It's Spectrum's property. So now, we had to wait until Monday for them to bring in a team to install a new wire, which meant running it all the way from our house to the box again. Spectrum said they're going to bill the HOA for this little escapade. Honestly, it just makes no sense to me. We had no notification or heads up that this would happen. They just came onto our property while I was at work. My dad only figured out something was wrong because he heard a commotion on the roof. When he checked, he saw the cut wire and managed to catch one of the guys who claimed to be part of the HOA. How crazy is that? I mean, isn't that illegal? Beyond destroying and stealing Spectrum's property, they can't just waltz onto our property and start cutting wires without letting us know. If I had been home, you can bet I would have gone outside and demanded to know what the hell they were doing. I'd have definitely told them to get the F off our property. Now, Spectrum has been pretty cool about the whole thing. They promised to increase our internet speeds and give us a faster, stronger cable as a way of apologizing for the inconvenience. So, at least that's a silver lining. But my real gripe is with the HOA. What the actual hell were they thinking? This is beyond frustrating and just mind-bogglingly dumb. Screw HOAs, for real. I guess part of my anger stems from how powerless I felt in the situation. You'd think in a community like this, we'd be able to count on a certain level of respect and clear communication from the HOA. But nope. It's almost laughable how much they messed up, but the reality is, it's not funny at all. It's inconvenienced us in a big way, and it feels like a violation of our space and our privacy. My dad was just as pissed off as I was when he realized what had happened. We both agreed that this was beyond overstepping boundaries. What kind of organization thinks it's okay to tamper with properties like that without even a whisper of a warning? And if it was about aesthetics, why didn't they just send a notice or an email asking if something could be done to make the wires less visible? There are just so many questions and so few answers. The thought that keeps circling in my mind is the blatant disregard for our property rights. The Spectrum technician said it best. They can't destroy or steal that wire because it belongs to Spectrum, not us. But as far as we're concerned, it doesn't matter whose wire it was. They had no business messing with it in the first place. The weekend felt like an eternity as we waited for Monday. In the meantime, we had to rely on mobile data for everything, which was a huge hassle. No streaming our favorite shows, no online gaming, and I had to get creative with my work assignments, which are heavily dependent on a stable internet connection. When Monday finally rolled around, the Spectrum team arrived as promised. They were really professional and efficient, which I greatly appreciated given the circumstances. They installed the new wire, ensuring it was properly secured. They even took extra care to make sure it wasn't an eyesore, and wouldn't fall victim to any future idiotic HOA directives. As they finished up, one of the Spectrum technicians gave me a bit more information about how they plan to handle the situation with the HOA. They assured me that the billing for this whole debacle would go to the HOA and not us, and they were pretty confident about seeking legal action if the HOA pushed back. I felt a bit of relief knowing that we had Spectrum on our side, but I wasn't going to let the matter go. Later that day, I drafted a lengthy complaint letter to the HOA. I laid out everything that had happened in meticulous detail, explained why what they did was unacceptable, and demanded some form of accountability and assurance that this wouldn't happen again. I plan to attend the next HOA meeting and bring this issue up in person. In the end, this incident has left me more wary and distrustful of the HOA than ever before. I always thought my only battles with them would be over mundane stuff like lawn care or house paint colors, not something as invasive as cutting and stealing internet wires. Is this really what we've come to? So here we are, back online and with a faster connection, but still seething over the unnecessary, thoughtless actions of our HOA. I'm ready to fight this, because this whole fiasco just underlines how important it is to stand up to overreaching organizations that think they can overstep boundaries without consequences. I'm not letting this slide, not now, not ever. I live in what is, on paper, a really amazing neighborhood. Seriously, it's like something out of those glossy magazines with lakefront houses, private lakes, and beaches where you feel like you're on vacation every day. Every morning, I wake up to the sight of sunlight dancing on the lake, the soft lapping of water against the shore providing a tranquil start to the day. The smell of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers fills the air, and the sight of ducks gliding effortlessly across the water is an everyday treat. The only downside is that many of my neighbors seem to think Trump is like the second coming of Christ, but hey, nobody's perfect, right? Most of the people here are pretty nice despite that little quirk. But then, there's my next-door neighbor. If you've ever met a hoarder, you kinda know what I'm talking about. But this guy takes it to the extreme. His house is so full of junk, it's spilled out into his yard, into the lake, and, annoyingly enough, into my yard too. To give you an idea, his yard looks like a scene from one of those post-apocalyptic movies where civilization has fallen, and scavengers roam among the ruins. Old, rusted bicycles lie intertwined with broken lawn furniture. Remember those black and white TVs from the 80s? He's got at least 3 of them stacked on top of each other. His stuff isn't just limited to typical household clutter. It's like a graveyard for anything and everything. There are garden gnomes, missing limbs, and faded lawn signs from political campaigns that ended years ago. It's like his stuff is alive and keeps multiplying. At first, we thought the homeowners association would handle it. I mean, these are the same people who send out nasty letters if your grass is half an inch too tall. They usually have no problem enforcing the tiniest of regulations, so it seemed like a no-brainer that they'd take action against this guy. They took him to court over the hoarding situation, and we were all hopeful. We thought things would finally get cleaned up, and our neighborhood would go back to the picturesque paradise it's supposed to be. The gossip around the mailboxes and at community events was that this time, he'd hit rock bottom, and we'd be rid of the eyesore. Boy, were we wrong. They lost the case. I remember the sinking feeling in my stomach when I received that email from the HOA board. A single line. We regret to inform you that we lost the case against Mr. Henderson. After that, it's like they just gave up. Instead of figuring out a way to deal with this guy who's basically broken every rule in the HOA book, they shifted their attention to geese. Yeah, you heard me right, geese. So now, the HOA pours all its time, energy, and money into this so-called goose brigade. These are a bunch of guys they've armed with guns. Don't worry, they're loaded with blanks, to scare away geese. Initially, I thought it was a joke. The first time I saw these guys, I laughed out loud. But no, this was serious. They even got custom-made outfits with the neighborhood logo and Goose Brigade written all over their hats and vests. The guns don't really hurt the geese, but they're super loud. Every time one goes off, I nearly jump out of my skin. Imagine peacefully reading a book on your porch and suddenly hearing a loud bang. It's like living in a constant state of mild warfare, but the enemy is just a bunch of harmless geese. Meanwhile, my neighbor's yard remains an overgrown wasteland, and his junk starts to colonize my property, bit by bit. I've had to extend my patio garden just to conceal the creeping boundary of his clutter. At one point, I found an old stroller wedged between our properties. It had somehow made its way over without any sign of a human hand guiding it. As if the hoarding wasn't bad enough, this neighbor isn't stable. One time, another neighbor got fed up and went to his place to ask him to clean up. The guy pulled a gun on him. I kid you not. A freaking gun. Ever since, no one dares go over there, especially me. He doesn't answer the door, doesn't go outside, and basically lives like a hermit. His grass is taller than some kids in the neighborhood, and it's getting impossible to ignore the stuff piling up in my yard. You'd think the HOA would do something, but nope. They'd rather gossip about him than take any real action. I've tried asking the HOA to step in again, multiple times. Every time, they just throw their hands up and say there's nothing they can do. It's like they're more interested in chatting about his latest crazy antics than actually doing anything productive. All this makes me wonder about priorities. When you live in a place like this, you expect a certain quality of life. You don't expect to be dealing with some guy's endless mountain of trash or worrying about getting a gun pulled on you just for asking him to take care of his property. And the Goose Brigade? Total waste of money. I mean, come on, you're telling me scaring off a few geese is more important than tackling a real problem that affects the quality of life for everyone? The geese are just a minor nuisance compared to living next to a guy who could be a potential danger. Sure, the geese leave droppings, and sometimes they can be a bit aggressive, hissing at people who get too close, but at least they don't hoard. The whole thing just seems so backward. The HOA should be putting their resources into fixing the actual problems in the neighborhood, not running around scaring birds. But that's what we're dealing with. A bunch of misplaced priorities in what should have been the best neighborhood ever. So, in the end, you either laugh or cry about it. Sometimes both. There are days when the absurdity of it all makes me chuckle. I mean, how can you not laugh at the sight of grown men in camo gear, brandishing guns full of blanks, marching around like soldiers in some avian war? But then there are days when the weight of living next to that ticking time bomb of a hoarder makes my blood boil. The frustrating part is, my neighbor breaks almost every rule in the HOA bylaws. From the state of his yard to the way his stuff is literally encroaching on other people's property, he's a rule-breaking machine. You'd think that alone would be enough for the HOA to take some serious action. Instead, when I bring up the issue to them, they look like they're caught in headlights. They have no idea what to do, and it's really annoying. They always talk about how they're doing their best, but their best seems to be just scaring away some geese. We've even offered to clean up the stuff ourselves, but since he never answers the door or goes outside, we can't exactly ask his permission. And you know, it's his property, so without his okay, we could get in trouble for moving his junk. It's just an all-around nightmare. The neighbors and I once had this grand plan. We thought about organizing a covert operation, a kind of neighborhood cleanup ninja squad, but the legal implications soon squashed that idea. No one wants to end up in a legal scuffle just trying to tidy up. In those rare moments when I can get a word in at the HOA meetings, they'll just shrug and gossip about him, spreading rumors instead of finding solutions. It's like they'd rather be a high school clique than a group of adults managing a community. They'll go on about how he was seen talking to himself, or recount the time someone thought they saw him carrying a huge sack, like some deranged Santa Claus of junk. Despite all the frustrations, we have to keep living here, making the most of what we've got. Who knows, maybe one day the HOA will get their act together, or the hoarder neighbor will have a change of heart. Until then, I guess we're left to find our own ways to deal with it all. We've started putting up higher fences, investing in more robust garden designs that double as barriers against his advancing tide of trash. Some of us even humor ourselves by creating friendly competitions, like who can come up with the most creative ways to block the view of his yard from our windows. And that's the story of how the HOA in my neighborhood cares more about scaring off geese than dealing with a violent, hoarding neighbor. It's not exactly the dream life by the lake, but it's home, for now. Until something changes, I'm learning to live with the imperfections, trying to find pockets of peace amidst the chaos. Maybe one day, the geese will win the battle and be the least of our worries, and maybe, a big maybe, my neighbor will find clarity amid his clutter. Until then, it's a blend of absurdity and reality, punctuated by the occasional bang of a Goose Brigade gun.
I would like to thank you for watching the video to the end. To encourage us to make more videos, please like, subscribe, comment, as well as share. Check out this other video if you haven't already.